Today we're going to be looking at solving polynomial equations in factored form. Now this is a break from what we've been doing. So far we've been adding, we've been subtracting, we've been multiplying polynomials, we've been expanding them and making them bigger. Now what we're doing, we're kind of going backwards from those situations and undoing a lot of the things. The first thing we need to talk about is the zero product property. So what I want you to do, just take a second and think of two numbers that multiply to give 0. Any two numbers. So let's say we've got A and B. So if you've got two numbers that multiply to be 0, every single combination that you can think of, one of those numbers has to be 0. So either A equals 0 or B equals 0. So this is the zero product property. That's very helpful when we get to something like this. Zero product property, if two things are multiplying together to be 0, then one of those two things has to be 0. So either 3x plus 4 equals 0 or 2x minus 6 equals 0. So what we need to do, we need to figure out both possibilities. We need to figure out both situations. So the first one, 3x plus 4 equals 0 is one of our possibilities. And our second possibility is our 2x minus 6 equals 0. Since both of these are true, we need to work both of them all the way out to find our two solutions that make this true. So I'm going to undo my addition and subtraction by subtracting 4. So I've got 3x equals negative 4. Then divide both sides by 3. And for the first part, x is going to equal a negative 4/3. And you can put that in decimal form if you want. I'm going to be lazy and not. The second one, to undo subtracting by 6, I'm going to add 6 on each side, which leaves me 2x equaling 6. Divide both sides by 2. And x equals a positive 3. So the two solutions, the two answers that work are x equals negative 4/3 and x equals 3. Your turn. Pause your video and use the zero product property to solve the equation for example 2. Both of these are fractions this time. Did you get x equals 4/3 and x equals 1/3? If you did, give yourself a little crazy mouth face. If you didn't, give yourself an X and go back. Figure out where you made your mistake and circle it if you figure it out. The next step, we're going to start the basic things or the basic pieces of factoring polynomials. This is going to lead into our second part of this unit, and the second part of this unit is probably one of the most challenging things that we get to this year. So these baby steps that we're working on now are really, really important. In factoring polynomials, the first thing we need to do is find the greatest common factor of the term. So the biggest thing that will divide all the pieces. Second, we need to divide those terms by your greatest common factor. And lastly, write the greatest common factor and that quotient from number 2 as a product. This sounds a lot more complex than it actually is. For this, I want you to think of your goal being a backwards distributive property. We're undoing the distributive property. So for this example, I've got 4r and 6w. So my terms, 4r and 6w, I need to find the greatest common factor. Well, between 4 and 6, my greatest common factor is 2. Between R and W, well, there is nothing that divides both R and W other than 1, so 2 is my only greatest common factor. 4R divided by 2 is just 2R. 6W divided by 2 is 3W. And by putting it in parentheses next to that 2, I've already done step 3. I've already written it as a quotient. So don't do this next part, but you can check by distributing that 2 to make sure that it actually works to give us that. So 2 times 2R is 4R. 2 times 3W is 6W. So if we redo the distributive property, it does give us that answer. Let's look at this example. D cubed and d to the 5th. I want to take the most of each thing that I can. So if I've got 3d's multiplying here and 5d's multiplying here, the most I can take from both is 3. Now, a lot of people get stuck here because you have to have this term. D cubed times what gives you d cubed? Well, d cubed times 1. Here's where some of our exponent knowledge from last unit comes in. D cubed times what is d to the 5th? Well, you add those exponents, so it's d squared. Okay, let's look at this one. For this one, we're going to have a coefficient and a variable. So between 10 and 5, I can divide both of those by 5. W squared and W, I can take out a W. 5 times 2 gives me 10. W times W gives me W squared. I'm subtracting, so I'm going to go ahead and just bring down that subtraction sign. 5 times what is 15? Well, 3. W times 1 is just W, so that is going to be our answer for this one. You have 4 super quick homework problems for tonight. The first 2 problems you need to use the zero product property to solve. The last 2 problems you need to factor using your greatest common factor and write those as a product. Have a great day.